I started coding in 1997, and after like close to 30 years now, I thought nothing in this profession will surprise me anymore. I've seen so much that there's no way to surprise me with anything. And of course, again, I was wrong. I have been surprised once more. In software engineering profession, pretty much like all other professions, from time to time comes a need to evaluate someone, either evaluate someone as a performer, evaluate someone's work, evaluate someone's progress, evaluate someone's essentially value for the company. For that, we have to use some kind of metrics. And the rule in software engineering is that whatever metric you use to evaluate software engineers, that metric stops working. Because inherently our profession is about creating shortcuts, essentially, in a way, gaming the system, but not in a nefarious way. This whole profession was built on the idea that computers can speed up your work and some jobs can be completely replaced by the use of a computer. We can also save a lot of paper, pens. We can limit the mistakes being made, improve reliability of the data, design things in the matter of days that used to take months or years to design using the construction paper and rulers and protractors and stuff like that. So whatever metric you develop to evaluate me as a software engineer, I'm going to be working towards inflating that particular aspect of my work. One of the dumbest examples of evaluating in software engineering work is to essentially count the lines of code that you submit to the code base. Why is it dumb? Because in our profession, it might sound counterintuitive, but the fewer lines of code you write, the higher quality your code is. If you can write something in 2 lines of code, and instead you write it in 200 lines of code, which code is better? Well, obviously, it's easier to maintain, test 2 lines of code rather than 200 lines of code. Makes sense? Many years ago, I worked for the company where the code base was very legacy and like procedural kind of a approach, essentially zero object orientation and no architecture. Essentially, a good starter for a product, right? So I started developing domain objects and adding test coverage and replacing all those legacy queries with just the domain objects that would hold all that logic, so we can reuse it from all the places. So instead of writing the query again, that query is somewhere, and you just have to call a method on the object. Very simple, very natural approach to refactoring. At some point, the domain logic, accounting logic, has changed. So one of my colleagues was tasked with updating the system to account for that change in logic. Perfect opportunity to now gather all those queries that touch this particular table or this particular set of tables, put it in one place, update it, make it work with current requirements, and just call it from all the other places. But what did he do? Well, obviously, he started just updating all those queries everywhere. That never even occurred to him as a solution to the problem. He got very high evaluation because that was a lot of lines of code, and it took 2 weeks. And now whenever you have to change anything in there again, you're gonna have to go through the same process. But the solution worked perfectly. It was tested thoroughly. The feature was developed relatively quickly, I'll say maybe a couple of weeks. And it worked. From the management perspective, he's a great engineer. From my perspective, he's in the wrong place. He's got no business coding to begin with, or he has a lot to learn. In either case, he shouldn't be responsible for doing this kind of work, not yet at least. Another metric that I'm familiar with or have seen in the past was test coverage. And nowadays, essentially, on the well-developed, well-maintained projects, you have the tools when you push the code to push the pull request. It's evaluated by static analysis whether all lines of code have coverage. If the coverage is missing for some lines of code, then the coverage dropped from 100%, or maybe your requirement is 80%, but it must never go down, right? 80% is the minimum. So if now it is 79.9% of test coverage, you fail the pipeline. You have to add the test to the lines of code you added. Well, that sounds a little more appropriate, and perhaps it is. It doesn't account for how meaningful those tests are and whether they actually account for all the code passes, all the possible use cases of the code. The test itself can be just assert true is true, and technically it's a passing test, but it's absolutely meaningless. The other more natural metric understood also by the management is how quickly can you develop a feature and how well it works, right? So that includes both the code execution, how well you wrote, how quickly you wrote the code, but also how well you designed the feature, how useful it is to the customers of the company. And in those cases, sometimes you develop a feature very quickly and the feature is amazing. Everybody loves it. It does really well. It made a lot of money for the company. But the code behind it is messy. It's very hard to maintain. And I've seen that in more than one occasion, but one especially. I worked for the company in fintech industry. And there was essentially one script in Python that was responsible for a core mechanic or a core aspect of the company. Without that one little script, we wouldn't be able to do business. That one script was one single Python file, roughly maybe 6,000-7,000 lines of code, complete spaghetti, no structure to it. It was essentially started as a small script, just do this and you're done, then add this and add another thing and another thing, and it just kind of bloated. Because at no point there was either no time or no effort to just kind of step back and just reevaluate and in a way rewrite it into something a little more maintainable. This was a startup environment, so obviously they don't like to hear stuff like that. They don't like to hear about the code quality or maintainability or anything. Can you deliver it for tomorrow? If so, we're in business. If you now start engineering very complex maintainable structures, who knows if we're going to exist next year. So it's less desired. It really hurts when it works the other way around. You never expected to grow this big, this quickly, and suddenly you have a really crappy code base, and now it's really difficult to just kind of dig yourself out of that hole. Very common as well. It's in a way you become a victim of your own success. But again, very high evaluation of the engineer because code works. It's developed quickly. No one else can work on that code base. No one else touches that file because it's essentially unreadable to humans unless you actually wrote it and unless you actually spend 8 hours a day going through that one script. It's completely unmaintainable, unworkable for you as a newbie on the project, even if you have decades of experience. The other evaluation And that is something that I struggled with throughout, well, at some points of my career, is after you develop a feature, after it's deployed and everything, how many times do we find a bug? Something you either missed, something you maybe misunderstood, something that you forgot about. And even despite having 100% test coverage, there is a bug in production. Some calculation is done wrong, or some button doesn't work in certain scenarios and stuff like that. That's a little more a fair evaluation, because essentially you are forced to stand behind your product, behind your work, and you take accountability. You're responsible for how this code performs in production. So if you were not aware before, you can now see how difficult it is to come up with a meaningful metric to actually evaluate a software engineer. But now we broke the record of stupid by evaluating a software engineer by essentially how much electricity they consume. Token maxing is a metric where you essentially focus on how much money does the developer waste, which causes two main issues. Number one, you're going to create as many meaningful or meaningless lines of code as you can using essentially a chatbot. That code is never going to be reviewed, not in a meaningful way, because we are only humans. We can't review 20,000 lines of code every day, at least not in a meaningful way. So it's going to be slap code that no one ever actually evaluated. And number two, you're bringing up the unnecessary cost of development. Some people compared it to evaluating employees on how much money they spend on the company credit card. Others compared it to evaluating pizza delivery guys instead of evaluating them on how many pizzas they delivered every night. They evaluate them by how many miles they drove. If that's the metric, then of course I'm going to deliver the pizza from Fulton to Ackworth going through Seattle. I'll bank 5,000 miles and I'm the great pizza delivery guy, although it took me a week to deliver a pizza to you. This is actually nothing new. When I first started using services like Uber Eats and DoorDash, those kind of things, I lived in Warsaw back then, and it was very common for Uber Eats drivers to use bikes and those big backpacks, kind of big cube on their back, and that's where you would put the food, and they would bring the bikes into the subway, take few stops on the subway to speed up the process, which was technically not allowed. Technically, you shouldn't be using bikes on the subway, but hey, it wasn't enforced. They were evaluated on the speed of the delivery, but speed of the delivery completely misses the point. Countless times I would order my favorite meal from McDonald's, which would include a drink, a sandwich, fries, and a drink. And it was delivered fast. Sure, it was delivered very fast, because the biker that was delivering it was speeding as much as he could. But the problem is, once I open my food, of course the drink is spilled, French fries are now a French fry soup, and the burger just disintegrates as soon as I touch it. By creating those meaningless metrics, people just kind of forgot what actually matters. I don't mind waiting another 5 minutes for my burger so I can enjoy the burger and the French fries and have a drink not spilled on my food. But if you evaluate drivers on the time they need to deliver it, that's going to be the result, and you're going to start losing customers. The same way, in software engineering, we kind of forgot what we actually, where the value is, essentially. What are we doing all this for? And now, instead of evaluating us on our actual output, our actual performance, we are now being evaluated on how quickly and how quickly can we deliver and how wasteful we can be. So the more wasteful engineer is a better engineer than the one that is resourceful. That might be the main reason why I no longer work in this profession, and probably will never work in this profession again, because number one, I'm getting too old. For some reason, they don't want wisdom of the senior in this profession anymore. And number two, I think they just don't like anyone pointing out stupidity of all this. Because at the end of the day, they're making money. That money doesn't come from the customers. That money doesn't come from the value that they create. That money just pours in from deep pockets of greedy people. But hey, it works. It works for them, at least for now. Who knows what the future will bring? But part of that problem is probably because the main input that you use to make those decisions, to evaluate those decisions, are chatbots themselves. Because chatbot will never tell you that it's nearly impossible to evaluate creativity. It's difficult to even measure creativity, because that's the one thing that the chatbot cannot do, and I predict it will never be able to do. It cannot be creative. It can only replicate creativity already done in the past, and eventually we're going to run out of that creativity that we built in the past, and we're going to enter the age of great stagnation. I will be gone by then, and other creative engineers will be gone by then, so there will be no turning back. Only now we have a chance to change the direction. Once we continue going in that direction for too long, there's not going to be a turning back point. But hey, I might be wrong. Well, I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you guys in the next one.